When I turned 18, I expected a typical birthday. Maybe a cake, a few presents, and some awkward hugs from distant relatives. I didn't expect my entire life to change. And certainly, I didn't expect to inherit an empire. But that's what happened. On my 18th birthday, my grandmother, the formidable matriarch of our family, handed me the company she had built from the ground up. And just like that, I went from being a high school senior worried about college applications to the CEO of Dawson Industries. That day, I remember standing in the ornate living room of my grandmother's estate. The room silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. The company had been Grandma's life's work. A massive enterprise that stretched across multiple industries. Real estate, manufacturing, tech, built over decades. She'd started with a single corner store in Chicago after my grandfather died when my mother was just a child. Through grit and shrewd business moves, she turned it into a national conglomerate. To say Grandma was a businesswoman through and through would be an understatement. She lived and breathed the company. And everyone in the family expected she'd pass it down to my mother one day. But that wasn't what happened. Grandma looked at me that day, with her sharp blue eyes that had seen everything the world could throw at a person, and said, "It's yours now." Just like that, she gave me the company. I was floored, stunned. Actually, I hadn't prepared for this moment. Sure, I had always shown an interest in the business, more so than my younger brother, Michael, who was 2 years younger than me. But I had never expected to be in charge of anything, let alone a company worth millions. Yet, there I was, with a title far too big for my 18-year-old self. And responsibilities I had no clue how to handle. At first, the gravity of it didn't sink in. It was all a blur of board meetings, conference calls, and legal paperwork. The lawyers explained the structure, how I'd technically own the majority of shares and act as CEO. But I wouldn't be expected to take on full day-to-day operations until after college. For the next few years, there would be senior executives guiding the ship, with me sitting in as an apprentice of sorts. I didn't have to make decisions yet, but I was already part of the machine. I would sit through boardroom discussions about expansion deals, profit margins, labor disputes, and tech investments, taking notes and learning the ropes. It was daunting, but also exhilarating. But not everyone was happy about this arrangement. Least of all, my mother. My mother had always assumed that she would inherit the company. It wasn't just an assumption. It was a certainty in her mind. She had grown up in the shadow of my grandmother's success, watching her build Dawson Industries from nothing. Mom had always been involved with the company, but never in a serious, hands-on way. Her role had been more ceremonial than anything else. Attending events, hosting galas, representing the company at charity functions. She was good at the social side of business. But everyone knew that the real work was done by Grandma and the executives. For years, my mother believed that when the time came, she would step into Grandma's shoes. But instead, my grandmother skipped right over her and handed the reins to me. I think my mother was blindsided by the decision, though she never said it outright. It wasn't her style to openly confront the issue. Instead, she smiled, congratulated me at the party, and said all the right things. But I could feel the tension between us from the moment Grandma made the announcement. Things got worse over the next few months. Subtle at first, quiet conversations between my mother and the board members when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Her constant questions about my decisions. Her thinly veiled suggestions that I needed help running the company. I brushed it off at first. I thought she was just having a hard time adjusting to the new reality. But then, it became clear that she wasn't just having a hard time. She was actively trying to undermine me. It all started to unravel one day when I overheard my mother speaking with a lawyer. She was in the library of our family home, thinking no one was around, and I happened to walk by. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough to realize what was happening. She was asking about ways to challenge the legality of Grandma's decision to give me the company. She wanted to know if she could contest the transfer of shares. If there was a way to block my control over the business. My mother was planning to take the company from me, and not for herself, for my brother, Michael. Michael and I had always been close, or at least we had been before all of this started. Growing up, we were typical siblings, competitive, but loving. He was always the more laid-back one, never caring much about school or business. He was charismatic, popular, always able to charm his way out of trouble, but he had no interest in the company. While I spent summers working as an intern in various departments at Dawson Industries, learning how things operated from the inside, Michael was off traveling, partying with his friends, enjoying life. He was the golden child, carefree and confident, and that was fine. I never held it against him. But now, he was being pulled into this mess by our mother. She saw him as her way of maintaining control. If she couldn't have the company for herself, she would make sure it went to Michael. She started planting seeds, talking about how it was unfair that everything had gone to me. How Michael should have a stake in the company, too. At first, Michael didn't seem interested. He shrugged it off, said he didn't care about the business. But over time, I could see her words working their way into his mind. Slowly, he started to change. He began asking questions about the company, about my role, about what it would mean if he were more involved. It all came to a head one evening at a family dinner. My grandmother, my mother, Michael, and I were sitting around the table. The conversation tense and strained. My mother had been unusually quiet, her eyes fixed on me throughout the meal. Then, out of nowhere, she dropped the bombshell. "I think Michael should have a more active role in the company," she said, her voice calm but loaded with intent. I froze. I hadn't seen it coming. At least not in this setting. I looked over at Michael, who avoided my gaze, and then at Grandma, who sat in stony silence. "I've been talking to the board," my mother continued, "and they agree that it's time for some changes. Michael is ready to step up, and it's only fair that he has the opportunity to contribute to the family business." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell her that this wasn't about fairness. It was about control, but another part of me was just tired. Tired of the constant manipulation, the backdoor conversations, the pressure to prove myself. I had done everything right. I had worked hard, learned the business, made responsible decisions, and still, it wasn't enough. Grandma finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but firm, the kind of voice that could command a room with just a few words. "The company is Emily's," she said, addressing my mother directly. "I made that decision, and it stands. Michael can find his own path." But my mother wasn't backing down. "He deserves a chance," she argued. "He's just as much a part of this family as Emily is. And let's be honest, she's too young to handle this on her own." There it was, the real reason behind all of this. My mother didn't think I was capable. She never had. To her, I was just a kid, playing at being a businesswoman. She couldn't see past my age, couldn't see that I had been preparing for this my whole life. All she saw was a child. And in her mind, the company needed a man, needed Michael. I felt the familiar anger rising in my chest, but I fought it down. Losing my temper wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I looked directly at my mother and said, as calmly as I could, "I'm not giving up the company. I've earned this, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else take it away from me." It was the first time I had openly stood up to her, and it felt both terrifying and liberating. I could see the shock on her face, and for a moment, I thought she might actually back down. But then she smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent a chill down my spine. "This isn't over," she said quietly, and with that, she stood up, motioned for Michael to follow her, and left the room. In the days that followed, my mother doubled down on her efforts to undermine me. She rallied support from certain board members, some of whom had known her for years and were loyal to her. Not me. She spread rumors about my inexperience, about how I was making reckless decisions that could jeopardize the future of the company. She even went as far as to suggest that I was only in this position because Grandma was getting too old to think clearly. The pressure was relentless, and I could feel myself starting to crack. Every day felt like a battle, not just to prove that I was capable of running the company, but to protect what was right.